What is going on, everybody? I am back today with another list video, and I'm doing this list in particular because a while ago I did a Q&A video asking you guys, like, you could ask me any questions or talk to me about the channel, and it seemed like one of the things that people wanted the most is to have me review their recommendations and do things that they are interested in me discussing. And that's one of my favorite parts about this channel, is interacting with you guys, responding to your comments, and covering subject matter that you all find interesting. And I've started a new series on the channel called Your Requests, which I've been watching movies that you guys have requested, and they won't come out like every single day by any means because of like the new releases and all the other things that I'm covering. But I have you guys in a list of the movies that you've requested, and I'm just going through. If you've done multiple requests, I just make sure that everyone gets one in before I get to the next person. And also, I have been requested to do some lists, and there were two lists that were requested. So this is one of two lists that I'm going to do. And someone asked me to do a list of my favorite character study films. And this is really difficult for me because character studies are probably my favorite movies. I love movies that dive into a specific character, understanding that character, or when that character is a representation of a theme. I really love movies that just keep me thinking and wondering about specific characters. And so trying to narrow this list down to a few movies was very, very difficult. I could do 30 to 40 plus of these, if not more. So I'm going to condense this list to just try to do some of my favorites today. And obviously, there's a lot more than that. So if you hear these and you want more, you can leave a comment and I can do a part two. But for the first part today, I'm going to talk about some of my favorite character study films. So first up is going to be the movie Taste of Cherry from director Abbas Kiarostami. This is one of the most beautiful movies ever made, and probably one of the best films depicting depression, mental health issues, and contemplation of suicide. We follow a character, his name is Mr. Badi, and he is driving around where he lives, picking up people in his car and essentially trying to get someone to help him kill himself. And he feels like he does not want to live anymore. And we don't necessarily know why throughout most of the movie. He is just dead set on ending his life. And he has these very long, thoughtful discussions with these people living in his community. And the movie was just incredibly eye-opening to me and just very moving to me as someone who has suffered from depression and mental health issues through most of my life. It's always unique to see different people's interpretation of those struggles. And what I really like about this movie, there's a very specific scene of dialogue throughout the film where Mr. Badi is talking about himself, and he essentially says, like, my struggles are not important to you. The reason why I feel this way, it shouldn't matter to you. I just feel this. You can't ever know my pain. You can't ever understand what I personally am experiencing. And I think that that's so relevant to so many people who deal with depression and mental health issues, is that every single person's experience is different. And even if someone's going through something that you might not think is as severe as someone else's, it's equally as important, because every person's life is important and every person's life matters. And I think that this movie does a really great job asking a lot of questions about that subject in a very poignant and thoughtful way. The performances in this movie are spectacular. It's some of the most gorgeous cinematography I've ever seen in a movie, and it takes a really unique spin in the third act that I wasn't expecting, that just leaves you thinking more and more after it's over. It's a movie that I own a physical copy of that's in the Criterion Collection. It's just truly masterful cinema. I need to watch more Kiarostami movies because I absolutely love Taste of Cherry, and I've thought about this movie virtually once a week ever since I watched it the first time. Up next is Synecdoche, New York from Charlie Kaufman. This is one of my favorite movies of all time, quite possibly in my top 5 movies of all time. And I love Caden's character in this movie because I find him to be so incredibly fascinating. What I love about Charlie Kaufman's movies is that all of his characters are inherently flawed. He does not write perfect people. And that's what I love about Hayden's character. He is a very broken person. He is someone who deals with fear of constantly being sick and dying. He constantly thinks that his something's going wrong in his life. You can tell that his marriage isn't going well. Even his relationship with his daughter is not perfect. He's pouring himself into his career, but he's to a period where he feels like he needs to do more. He needs to tackle something incredibly important that could impact a lot of people. He wants to leave a legacy, and so he takes on this absurdist project that is just absolutely ridiculous and nonsensical when you hear about it, but it becomes so representative of all the themes that Charlie Kaufman is trying to explore. And what I love about Caden's character is we see him through different periods of his life. He ages a lot through this movie. We see him at different points. And what's so fascinating is where his mindset is. And I love that like this character is very fundamentally broken, and he's dealing with very severe depression and anxiety and fear for the future, and doesn't seem to know how to make the right decisions for himself. And he'll make a decision that sometimes works to his benefit but oftentimes harms him as well. And this movie does a really phenomenal job of incorporating real like dramatic tension with like a really offbeat dark comedy. And that's what I love so much about Charlie Kaufman, is because I feel like the way he views the world, he's a little bit of a sadist, but I think that that's important. Like I think everyone that sees the world for what it is a little bit jaded about our planet and about the people who live here. I think it's impossible not to be when you see so much injustice and hate and hurt in the world towards groups of people solely because of ignorance and lack of intelligence. And so I think Charlie Kaufman, being someone who is incredibly intelligent and incredibly thoughtful, he examines a lot of those things in his movies. And this one in particular, it makes me cry every time I watch it. It's one of those movies that the first time I saw it, when it ended, it fundamentally changed me as a person. And I think that there are a lot of movies that have meant a lot to me throughout my life, but there are very few that have like fundamentally changed who I am as a human being. And I actually have a big Synecdoche, New York tattoo on the back of my leg. I just find the movie to be not only perfectly acted, but incredibly well shot. The John Bryan score to the film is one of my favorites of any movie. I just think that everything works so well together to create just a truly masterful viewing experience. It's a movie that I rewatch at least once or twice a year, and it's just it's incredible. I don't know what more to say. It's just amazing. Up next is Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. I love David Lynch. He is one of my favorite directors of all time, if not my favorite director of all time. And I'm so glad that he decided to do a story about Laura Palmer. And I think what's so fascinating about this movie is it was so hated when it was first released in theaters, because people who watched the Twin Peaks television series so much wanted a story and a continuation of what happened at the end of season 2. But instead, David Lynch said, I want to tell the story of Laura Palmer, because Laura Palmer is, in his own words, the most important character that he wrote in his entire career. And I think this is one of the most beautiful human stories ever created. I think it's truly raw and realistic emotionally. I think that it covers a wide array of subject matter that I think is still very culturally relevant and poignant to the times we live in now. Cheryl Lee's performance in this is one of the greatest in any movie of all time. I love her so much, and I think that he gives 100% in this movie and really just lives and breathes this character to its fullest extent. This is a movie clearly, Laura Palmer, beginning of Twin Peaks, she's killed. We're trying to spend the entire series finding out who killed her. And in this, we already know who killed her, but we get to see what got her to that point when she died and what were the things happening around her. And she is the most popular girl in her school. She is beloved by everyone, but she is living a dark life where she is being sexually abused and she's being tormented. She pours herself into drug use and sex work in order to essentially just feel something. Like she wants to feel like a person. And so she takes these things that she can control, because so much of her own life is out of her control. And I think that it's a really beautiful and poignant story of tragedy. And I think that it's handled in such a remarkable way that every time I watch this, it truly shakes me to my core. I got to see this in a theater with Cheryl Lee and Ray Wise in attendance. It was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever been a part of. Just hearing her talk about the movie and like talk about playing that role. It's simply incredible, and it's a movie that I feel like has been seared into my brain. It's a movie that I never stop thinking about, and it's a movie that I recommend you just watch the Twin Peaks series and watch this movie. But it is a movie that I think if you're a film lover and you're a lover of character studies, I think you'll truly love this movie. Up next is The Hunt from director Thomas Vinterberg. This is one of the most harrowing, pressing, sad movies that I've ever watched in my entire life. A story of misunderstanding and of truly just like a bad situation for a good person. And I find this movie to be incredibly fascinating in the time period that we live in when you go back and reflect on it. Because if you know nothing about The Hunt, Mads Mikkelsen, who plays the lead character in this movie, he's a teacher at like a preschool or very young kids that he takes care of, and he is beloved in the community. And he's gone through a divorce with his wife, and the two of them aren't really close, and they have a son together, and he's getting very close to retaining more custody of his son. And he's a great dad, and he's always there for him. And there's this young girl at the school who is like obsessed with him. He walks her to school every day, very close friend of the family. And she tries to kiss him on the cheek or something, or on the mouth one day, and he sits her down and says, "Hey, this isn't appropriate for kids to do to adults," and like is very professional, talks to her and says like, "Hey, this is why you can't do that." Well, it angers her, and she ends up making these accusations to the teachers about him, and not realizing, being a child, what the ramifications of making a very large accusation like that against an adult would have. And so because of that, the entire town turns against him. And he's on the verge of losing his job. He's going to lose custody of his son. All of these things that he's worked so hard for. And I think that it's very pertinent in the culture of the Me Too movement, when so many women have spoken out against men doing wrong against them. And it's so incredibly important to discuss those things and be pertinent and listen and be there for women when they do those things. But I thought what was so interesting about this movie is I feel like the whole, like, the town is immediately willing to turn on him. I think this movie is so much more representative of life just fighting back against you when things feel like they're going to go back to normal. And it's about one man's perseverance. And I think what makes his character so interesting is what he has to overcome in this, because you could just fold at any moment. And he gets pretty damn close, but he never does. And I think that he so much yearns and wants for that relationship with his son and everything that he's worked towards, that he's not going to let anything get in his way. And it's truly a remarkable piece of filmmaking. Thomas Vinterberg is a genius, in my opinion. I think he has one of the greatest catalogs of film of any director, and this is one of his most amazing works. It's not an easy watch by any means, but it's an incredibly fulfilling one, and I'd recommend you check it out if you've never seen it before. Up next is Spike Jonze' Her. I've talked about this movie a ton on my YouTube channel for a very long time. It's one of my favorite movies ever made. Theodore Twombly, played by Joaquin Phoenix. I love this character, and I think that it's such an incredibly interesting character, because when you look at what his character has gone through, he's dealing with loneliness and isolation after his divorce. Something's happened in his marriage to separate the two of them. We don't necessarily know 100% what happened completely, but we get little glimpses into why it ended. And so he becomes very lonely. There's a new operating system that people download on their phones that is incredibly intelligent, and it adapts. And when he downloads his, he starts to form a relationship with it because it pays attention to him and cares about him and treats him like a human being. And this movie's so interesting because, I remember when it first was released and people talked about like, oh, it's a movie about a guy who has sex with his phone. And I think it's so interesting about society when people boil things down to something like that solely because of fear of exploring an idea or looking at art as representative of something so much larger. And I think that this movie really at its core is very beautiful and very moving, and it's a story of a broken man trying to find hope amid in life when everything else around him seems hopeless. And I love his character. I think the development of his character is really great. I think that the way he has to go through this kind of emotional roller coaster to the third act, which still feels like someone just kind of jabbing a knife in you and twisting. It's just really remarkable filmmaking as a whole. It's just one of my favorite movies ever made. It's a movie that I think about nonstop, and I always get excited to watch it again. Next on the list is going to be the movie Carnival of Souls from director Herc Harvey. This is another character study that I just find really fascinating. I cannot believe Herc Harvey only ever made one movie. This is one of my favorite horror movies ever made, but I think what's so fantastic about this movie is that it's not just a simple horror movie. There's so much going on with Mary's character, the lead of the film, and everything that's going on in her head. She experiences a tragedy. She gets in a car wreck at the beginning of the film, and she's the only survivor of this car wreck. And she works as an organist at a church, but she has no affiliation with the church. She doesn't care about religion. She has no ties to the church. She just plays the organ as a job. It's literally for her, it's coming into work, it's doing this thing and leaving. And she ends up leaving the town that she's in to go somewhere else to work as an organist while she's constantly haunted by this ghostly figure. And she feels out of place in the world. She doesn't feel like she belongs, and she's constantly striving and yearning for something. She wants to feel some form of purposefulness. And the movie's so interesting, kind of examining that feeling of hopelessness and that feeling of isolation and desperation to find either companionship or just something to kind of move you forward, to keep you going. Because depression and loneliness, it oftentimes pushes people into a direction where they're just yearning for something to cling to. And I think her character is so symbolic of that. And what's interesting is the guy across the hall where she's living, constantly trying to form a relationship with her. And she's not really interested in that. She's more interested in just like, finding hope and just escaping this feeling of just complete and total and utter emptiness that came from a result of the accident that she was in. And this movie is beautifully shot, truly horrifying. One of my favorite scores to a movie ever made. I love just the haunting piano music in this. It's just a really fantastic movie that I think about on a day-to-day basis. And then last on the list, I did not want to keep you forever. We're getting close to the 20-minute mark of this video, so I'm going to do one more. And the film I'm going to be talking about last with you is Andrei Zulawski's Possession, one of the greatest films ever made, and Isabella Gianni giving one of the greatest performances of all time. Her character in this movie, to me, is one of the most fascinating characters in all of cinema, because we have this couple. The husband's played by Sam Neill. He is constantly out and about for his job, not home very often. He comes home and his wife is completely fed up with him, and she decides that she wants to leave. And the entirety of the movie is he cannot come to terms with that, so he tries to figure out why, and he starts to learn these very strange things are going on with her and tries to investigate what that is. What I love so much about this movie is I think that the way that this film views divorce and the idea of divorce is so incredibly fascinating, and I think so much of what the film conveys is poignant now, and how men perceive women in a divorce, and how her character is literally viewed as a psychopath, and like there would be no rationale as to why she would leave this relationship. And I think that it's so interesting, the allegory that exists there, and when you just get into the more absurdism of the situation, to where like she essentially is shown having sex with a monster, which is so interesting as to like that's the only way that a man could ever perceive a woman leaving that relationship. He could never put any of the blame on himself, or that there's problems in the relationship there. It's all on the woman. And I love the way that she perceives that. And I love that it kind of tackles all of these misconceptions about divorce. I love there's an incredibly beautiful monologue from Ajani in this movie where she says, I can't exist by myself because I'm afraid of myself. I'm the maker of my own evil. And I think it is the most thoughtful and engaging piece of dialogue that I've ever seen in a movie. And I think it speaks volumes for what the entire film feels representative of. It also takes place literally in the middle of a war right next to the Berlin Wall, which I think is completely and totally fascinating when you think about symbolism of that in comparison to this marriage that's falling apart. There's so much little attention to detail in this movie. Everything feels perfectly examined. Everything feels like it's executed to a masterful degree, and I love how open-ended the end of the film is because it just makes you think. And every time I watch this movie, I feel like I pull something different out of it. But if there's one thing I get out of this movie, it's Isabella Johnny's character is fascinating. I love this. It is a must watch for any horror fan. So what are some of your favorite character studies? Let me know in the comments. These are just some of mine. And if you'd like to hear me do a part two, I've got a whole bunch of movies loaded up on a list. I could do a part two easily. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.